So I'm very glad to see you all. I'm going to hand you over to Priya Guha of Merian Ventures, who's going to be leading the discussion. Please do send in your questions either via the Hopin app if you are part of our virtual audience, and if you are here live, the old-fashioned way of putting your hand up is going to work very well. Over to Priya.
Thank you so much, Joy. It's a real pleasure to be here, and a pleasure both to have those of you who are dialing in remotely and also some people in the room, which is a very novel experience that we haven't had for the past 18 months or so. I'm absolutely delighted to have the chance to bring together two women with me today who have some fantastic personal experiences to share about the experience of being a female founder. So with me joining live from San Francisco is Priyanka Dhir. Priyanka is the founder and CEO of BoothIQ. BoothIQ is a San Francisco-based startup focused on reinventing exhibitor lead gen at trade shows through technology and analytics. Welcome, Priyanka.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
And then with me here at CogX is Tahmima Anam. Tahmima is a novelist, short story writer, and anthropologist, and some more of that anthropology will come out later, I'm sure. She is also the author of The Startup Wife, just here, in case you were wondering what that was sitting in front of us. She's going to tell us a bit more about that later. She's also a board director at Roli, a music tech startup founded by Roland Lamb. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me. And I am thrilled to see all these actual humans in front of me. I can hardly believe it.
So I wanted to start by turning over to you, Priyanka, if I may, which is one of the things that you talked to me about was the very beginning of your entrepreneur journey and the impact that a particular program called Project Entrepreneur made on your desire to build the company. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was an incredible experience. It was based in New York. 100 of the top female-founded startups in the country could attend. I was fortunate enough to be able to get a scholarship to go and attend this great program. It really impacted me because of not only the network of women that were there that I could connect and learn from, but also just all of the experienced leaders you got to interact directly with, and you got to learn from all of their advice in various areas and specialties, whether it was marketing or accounting. And it really helped to create almost a platform for me to jumpstart my company and kind of go on the right path in terms of next steps.
So tell me, Priyanka, when you went on that program, were you definitely going to become an entrepreneur, or was there something in that moment in your life that sort of changed your journey? And if so, what was it?
Yeah, I think I always had the entrepreneurial spirit, but I needed kind of just guidance along the way, like many of us do, just to really push us along and give us the right foundation to get started. I really think that it did spark ideas for my company in ways I could do things differently. And that's why I think surrounding yourself with a great group of people, especially in an environment like that, was so important, because you learn things that you don't normally expect, and it really sets you in motion.
It's so true. There's a phrase that I often use called having your tribe, which is that group of people around you who you can go to for advice about the sort of stupidest things or the most serious of things, and you know you'll get some really solid guidance. But I guess the other aspect that came up when we were talking, and maybe Tahmima, you've got some thoughts on this, was actually the emotional journey that you go through when you're starting that entrepreneurial cycle. Tell us a bit about what you've observed on that from where you've sat over the years.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's so great to have Priyanka here because she is the female founder and she's the expert. So I have been on the board of a company that was founded by my husband for the last 10 years. And I'm an anthropologist by training. And I was just watching this whole story unfold from the sidelines. And there was just this incredible drama to it. You know, it was this all-consuming, major highs and lows, feeling like we're on top of the world one minute and then everything's crashing and burning the next. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this too. As an investor, it can be so dramatic. And so I just had to write it down. And instead of being a female founder, I just imagined that I was a female founder, and I got to make all of my fantasies come true in this book that, would never, would be very unlikely to happen in real life. So she's a woman, she's a founder, she's an immigrant, and she builds this incredible kind of AI platform that takes over the world. And obviously she encounters a lot of obstacles, but I also gave her some opportunities that I kind of, in my kind of fantasy world, I got to give her this incredible trajectory. So it was a mix of things that I had seen and things that I wanted to see that made their way into the book.
That's great. I love that. You described it to me as a feminist rom-com, didn't you? So we're going to come back to that later. Priyanka, I wanted to come back to you because one of the things that I'd really like to dig into in this session is what's unique that to you, from your perspective, to that experience you had at the start of your journey, that emotional journey for you as a female founder versus perhaps male peers that you saw founding businesses. Was there something different, do you think, that you had to go through?
Yeah, I think I was constantly almost surprised by some of the questions that I'd be asked in meetings, or just kind of the comparisons that were placed on me from the get-go as a female founder. Some of the things include automatically being targeted as, oh, hey, I'm sure you founded like some sort of fashion or beauty-based company. And when I would tell them I was in trade show lead generation, they'd be like, wait, what? Like, what kind of shows? It has to be something more feminine. Other things and situations would be people automatically assuming that, or telling me honestly that I needed a male co-founder in order to be considered a more legitimate business. And when I would flip the question back and say, are you missing, like, what are you missing? Is it domain expertise? Because I have that. It would always circle back to, no, we just think your team needs to be more well-rounded. And I would be directly told that in order to be considered legitimate, I would probably need a male co-founder.
For those of you who are dialing in rather than being in here in the room, you will have missed the fact that some of our audience were actually giggling at the prospect that Priyanka needed to have a male co-founder. So I think that reflects our collective opinion on that topic, Priyanka. Mm-hmm. But in a serious way, that did actually affect how you thought about the start of your business journey, didn't it? Tell us what you did when you were given that advice about getting a male co-founder.
Yeah, it very much influenced me, especially because I was new to the startup world and I wanted to fit in and I wanted to be considered a serious business. At one point, I went out and recruited a male co-founder and found someone who didn't end up staying long enough to vest in the business just because of his own personal reasons. But just the fact that I had pushed myself far enough to fall into that and believe it was difficult as a company, because I had to give away like such a chunk of my business, or in theory when he had originally signed on, just because he was male. And even during presentations, it was really funny, when I was pitching the business, I would end presentations by putting his name at the end of my presentation, and just the glitter in people's eyes as soon as they heard that, oh, it's a male co-founder, and he happened to be from Stanford, people just lit up. They felt like that made it serious. And that really changed kind of how I thought about my ability until he left. And I was like, no, I have built this on my own up until this point, and I didn't need a male co-founder to prove that.
Have you seen that, Tahmima, in your observation of the startups around you, whether Roli or elsewhere, that having that sort of male presence give this instant stamp of credibility that isn't there when sometimes people see a female founder?
Well, I just think that women founders are talked about completely differently than male founders. And also what we now are calling femtech, which possibly this is a word that was not coined until quite recently. I have this recollection of, so, we had some investors and they would often talk about other companies that were pitching to them. And one of the investors had just been pitched to by a Kegel trainer, a startup, founded by a woman, which was a Kegel trainer. And he was like, ha, 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 it's just a sex toy. And I was trying to explain, I was like, no, it's actually scientifically proven that, childbirth can cause, and I was really graphic, and I was like, cause incontinence, and it's really medically important, and you should really invest in this and he was like, I thought it was just a sex toy. I mean, you can control it with your phone. And it was just like this sort of lack of respect that this person was bringing something that was actually credible and great. I mean, sex toys can be credible too, but that's not what she was pitching. And I just found just the irreverence to be quite interesting, because I don't know whether it was the subject or the founder, but certainly there wasn't that kind of like, okay, we're going to take this seriously. It was just like something that they could joke about afterwards. And I was just imagining them all kind of laughing at her as she left, pitched and then left the room. So
I'm going to come back to the investor experience. I'd love to get your take on this, Priyanka. But just a reminder for anyone who's dialing in virtually, or indeed anyone here in the room, we are taking questions. So please start thinking of those. And if you're dialing in virtually, please just put them in the Q&A box on Hopin, and we will take them throughout the conversation. So let's go back to that topic of investors. It's an absolutely essential part of a high growth startup's journey, pitching and securing funding from investors. So how has that been for you, Priyanka? Tell us a little bit about your experience with investors.
Yeah, I mean, like good experiences and bad experiences. I think, like I mentioned, some of the questions that get circled in those meetings about the validity of the business, or they just kind of want to see more men on the team. Some of those questions have been difficult, but on the flip side of things, one of my main investors is a male and has been a great champion and supporter of the company. And so I think it really came down to finding the right person and finding the right people that are supporters of the business, and really have them believe in you as an individual, not male, not female, and nothing else, just you as a business owner, and the respect that you have for the business and the knowledge that you have, and finding that right partnership together with them.
And if I can dig into that slightly, and I'm sure maybe Tahmima, you've also got a perspective on this, but I'll ask you first, Priyanka, what drives that, do you think? What is behind that investor behavior when it's more of a negative experience for you as a female founder?
Yeah, I think it's built on just their patterns of behavior. So kind of what happens, especially what I've seen happen again and again, and it's been talked about in Silicon Valley especially, is that a lot of companies that are funded are these male founded startups. And they joke saying that, oh, like as long as there's a white male from Stanford, like that's a valid company. And they just keep reinvesting in those businesses. And what ends up happening is some of those businesses will become successful, and that'll prove their point of investment. And then they'll just repeat that behavior again. And then all the other companies that are still valid and have great ideas don't necessarily get that kind of funding, because these investors are stuck in this pattern of behavior, and just repeat it because that's what they know.
Yeah, I think in the write-up for this session, it was referred to as the sort of the PayPal mafia story, i.e. that those incredibly successful founders then went on to invest in their friends and their networks. And you get this sort of rather tight web between a lot of the big name companies that we all know and love, because they've all invested in each other and helped grow not only their own businesses, but each other's. Tahmima, what's your take on sort of what drives that sort of investor behavior?
Well, I guess I have a question for you, which is, how do we think it's going to change? Because there's so much talk now about diversity. Is it just going to be, if there was a woman in that room when the woman came in and pitched her Kegel trainer, would the conversation have been different? Is it just literally having more women in the room? Is it people like you who invest in female founded companies, and that's kind of your brief? I mean, I'm not an expert, and I'm curious to see whether you feel like things are changing, and Priyanka, whether you feel like things are changing, and what is driving that change?
Look, I mean, from my perspective, I think that there are so many things that need to be done to drive those changes. I mean, we have to sort of tackle inequities at the age of 5, 6, 7, when girls are given sort of one preconditioned stereotype and boys another. But equally, there's a lot of really good work going on now. And I see this in the UK, and I'm sure, you're seeing it too in the Bay Area, Priyanka, where actually there are great best practices and advice about what people can do to root out what are very frequently unconscious biases about how the system is reinforcing these prejudices that people like Priyanka have experienced in their journey. Do you see any good practice where you are, Priyanka, in terms of companies that are sort of consciously thinking about this, investors that are consciously thinking about this?
Definitely. I also think that there's a lot of good programs and good groups that you can be a part of. Some of my best female founder friendships have come out of some of these groups that are there, because they know that there has to be a supportive network to kind of help bring others up. Something that I had actually learned back at that Project Entrepreneur conference from one of the speakers, she said the only way for more women to be to have more opportunities is for other women in higher roles to bring them up and kind of pull them up to that next step. And so I started seeing some of that play out, whether it's more investors like yourself coming up and kind of bringing these women up and giving them an opportunity, giving them a voice. I definitely see that coming up. Some major companies in the Bay Area, in San Francisco as well, I think making gender bias more known in their business and making statements saying we want to employ more females, or our company is valuing equality in different ways. And that's all amazing to see, especially I've been in San Francisco for 5 years, and even in that 5-year time span, I've definitely seen a bit of a difference start to take place.
Yeah, and I think it's probably also worth just saying that while this session is particularly focused on female founders, we know this problem isn't just directed to female founders. There's an experience of an underrepresented founder more broadly, whether it's Black founders, access to capital, same challenges, Latina founders in the US, very similar challenges. So I think, what we also have an opportunity to do is take some learnings from all of our collective experiences and really try and make a difference. So I wanted to come back to sort of the journey of a founder and talk about the sort of talent acquisition piece, because when we were chatting before this session, we were also talking, Priyanka, about your experiences about maybe finding talent acquisition a bit more challenging because you were having to sort of really prove yourself in a way that perhaps male founders didn't have to. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, the questions that were kind of asked, people would kind of pinpoint things like, well, how much money are you making right now? They'd ask very quantitative based questions to me as a female founder. And when I'd ask my male founder friends if they were asked similar questions by people that they were trying to acquire or kind of bring onto the team, they would be like, no, they kind of asked more general questions. What's your overall vision, or how do you kind of see this playing out? I'd even actually talked to some other startups who were male founded, and even it came down to even their investors would kind of do the same thing. My company at the time was profitable and we were growing, and I asked that particular startup, what's your kind of trajectory? And they said, we don't really know where we're going. We just know we have the right people, but we've raised, like, let's say approximately $10 million at the time. And so you would just get confused by, wait, am I doing everything wrong or am I doing everything right? Because you have to answer a whole different set of questions from different people, even when it comes to bringing people onto the team.
And maybe it's asking a question you don't want to answer, but did it affect your decisions on hiring? Did you sort of say to those people who are asking, what are clearly more unreasonable questions, did you just say they're not right for me?
Yeah, I think at some point you just have to. And I ended up looking to more women and maybe they will kind of refocus on just the business. And one of my first hires ended up being a female. And that, I think it was just because the level of understanding was not based on the questions that the males were asking. It was like, what is the actual value in this business and how can I contribute to it?
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Tahmima, which has come up a bit in those questions we've just been talking about with Priyanka, is around the language because you touched on it earlier, and we talked a while back about the language of disruptive technology and how you think that influences some of the prejudices we've been talking about. Tell us a bit more about your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I found so interesting as I was kind of observing the startup world is how particular the language is and how exaggerated, and all the claims and this whole kind of concept of disruption, which we're all sort of buying and sort of believing in, which is like, we're really going to change the world. We're really going to make a difference, whether it's like, you know, the way you do your laundry, or how you order a pizza, or, you know, how you talk to your friends, or everything. Everything is ripe for disruption. And the thing that I found most curious is that in the structures of power that exist in this world, we are just reproducing the same structures of power, you know, especially when it comes to gender, race, all the sort of things that we expect about the old world are being recreated in this new world. But it's taking advantage of this language of transformation. And I just found that really ironic and kind of interesting. And also I find the sort of hyper excited like claims to be just so ripe for satire. I mean, if you go on the website of any kind of company, they will be claiming to like completely rock your world, whether it can be the tiniest thing. But it's and there's no irony. It's not like they're saying, oh, haha, I mean, we know you don't actually believe that this, you know, whatever pet food is going to, you know, completely change your world. But we're saying it anyway. I mean, they are like genuinely drinking their own Kool-Aid. And I just find that earnestness and the hyperbole to be so fascinating and hilarious.
And then do you think that has a link to gender stereotypes?
Absolutely. I mean, men are just not as self-deprecating as women. They just are able to have this kind of bravado and confidence that I think we can learn a lot from, and say, you know, if you say something with enough confidence and with enough like, yeah, I'm totally, this pet food is going to completely change your world, then eventually people will believe you. So I definitely think that is, and, you know, we've seen all the studies about women and the way that they talk and their language being much more circumspect, which actually hurts them in their careers. So for sure, I think that has a very tangible effect on people's opportunities.
So Priyanka, this is probably a question I should ask sort of a dear friend of yours, or maybe your parents or something. But do you think you've had to change your behavior as a female founder in light of the sort of things Tahmima's talking about?
That's a really interesting question. I think in certain ways, I think like especially like right in the beginning, when you kind of first get launched into this whole startup world, I feel like the San Francisco kind of even clothing environment of what is considered normal to wear, very casual startup tees, hoodies, and like people almost take you more seriously when you have the startup tee on. And
you need a Patagonia gilet, don't you? That's the uniform.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, okay, so I have to not wear a blazer or a suit, or kind of no heels. Do not wear heels. People will completely write you off altogether. So I think from that perspective, you want to fit in. I think we just all have this fit in kind of culture and mentality. And so I think I changed somewhat in that way. But I think it was a growing experience overall, because you do learn how to have conversations with people that may or may not understand you. And so you really kind of have to learn and adapt as you go. And along the way, just like Tahmima said, you'll laugh along the way, and you'll kind of do your best.
Well, if you don't laugh, you'll cry, and it's much more important to laugh, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'd love to have time for some questions. So there is a lady in the room here with a question. I don't know if we have somebody with a mic that could take that to her. Thank you so much, Joy. Really appreciate it. Would you like to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yes, I'm Meg. I work in innovation scouting, and I've actually worked in California and in London scouting for tech. So it's maybe less a question, more an observation of my experience, and to see if it resonates with you guys in the panel. So something that I have observed is a lot of the time when it comes to pre-seed, seed round, early stage startups, so much of it, I mean, a lot of investors say they're being very analytical and, you know, very by the numbers, but in reality, it boils down to the cult of the founder and the cult of the personality. And are they going to make this bet on that person? And I think that is what is playing into this so much, is this, does this person feel like the kind of person I believe in giving the money to? Not even the concept, I heard people talk again and again of like, I believe in them. They can pivot later, I believe in them. And an observation I've seen since coming back to the UK and seeing in London is I'm increasingly seeing more and more startups, and particularly female founded startups, benefit from Innovate UK and other forms of grants. And so you'll have companies that will have raised hundreds of thousands, but never actually gotten anything from a VC. And does this resonate with you guys? And is that a potential? I'm not saying we should ignore VCs, but is there another way forward that could add to the diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. So Priyanka, can I turn to you first in terms of that question, particularly around the early stage elements?
Yes, of course. I definitely agree with you, first of all. I've seen that happen time and time again. And like I mentioned, I think the questions are so quantitative based, I think for women in particular, and then for men, sometimes it's just kind of overall vision based. And that's because they believe in the team and they believe in what the team is going to do or what they're going to bring to the table. So I've definitely seen that come up. I think that when it comes to raising capital, I think certain companies require a certain amount of money in order to grow, and sometimes like VCs are that source, and they need that kind of network, or they need that amount of capital. So VCs are the people to go to. So, but grants are a great way to get started. And if you're looking for a starting path, I definitely think that that's a good one.
Yeah, I know. I should declare an interest in that. I'm a member of the Council of Innovate UK, and I think I would entirely agree with you, Meg, that they form a very integral part of the early innovation system in the UK. But I wanted to actually sort of ask your perspective on that same question, Tahmima, because one of the things that is often talked about in the world of investment is just that gut feeling. So, what influences that gut feeling, and is there a sort of gender dimension there, do you think?
Well, I just think it's so interesting that you mentioned the cult of the founder, because there's like an actual cult in my book, and it's basically taking the cult of the founder and exaggerating it. So they build a platform, and this founder is kind of seen as a messiah, and his wife is actually the one who's built all the code and she's done all the work. And I just think if you think about it, all of our great figures in history are male figures. All of our prophets are male. So obviously, if you're going to build someone up, you're going to build them up in the image that you have inherited for millennia. And completely makes sense. And I just love your, thought that it's like, if you take the kind of personality driven aspect of it away and really look at businesses possibly based on other success metrics, then you're going to have a greater diversity of founders basically getting to be invested in. So
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I know a very dear friend of mine who has actually just given up on taking external investment and just drove to profitability earlier because she was so sick of having frustrating conversations with investors. So maybe there's a success element there as well. We've got a question here and then another one at the back there. So sorry, Joy, you're running around today. And please do, if you're dialing in from online, please do type in questions on the chat.
Thank you so much for sharing. My name is Farah. I've worked in tech in San Francisco, and now I work in tech in London. And it's really refreshing to hear all of this. You touched on this idea that there now has been kind of a turn towards wanting more women in leadership and recognizing how important that is, which is great. But I've also seen the downside of that, which is murmurs and whispers that, oh, you're a diversity hire. Oh, they promoted you because you're a woman. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that and how we can combat that and continue to boost our worth and that we deserve to be here and that we are great at what we're doing. And it's not just that they now care about hiring women.
Tahmima, why don't you go first?
Well, I actually have experience of this in the publishing world. So, as a kind of person of color, female writer, I have people come up to me and say, oh yeah, you're definitely going to get nominated for that prize. I mean, they need more women, or they, who look at you. And I just think, to me, and I haven't practiced this, but I'm going to, because I've, decided to just be sassier in life, is to just call people out and say, did you just hear yourself say that? Are you saying that I don't deserve something, or that, are you actually implying that the scales are tipped in my favor? Like, read any history book, read any book of statistics about who wins literary prizes or who gets reviewed, and it's the same for, you know, tech investors and founders, etc. There is no way that this game is like in my favor in any way. So I just think maybe bringing a little bit of that sort of frankness to a conversation about that, or confrontation, as a sort of micro maneuver, is a small idea, but I'm sure you guys have, you know, bigger systemic ideas about how we can combat that sort of conversation about diversity hires and tokenism.
What do you think, Priyanka?
Yeah, I think for me, I always go back to expertise and knowledge, because that's something that no one, I think, can take away from you. They might judge you based on the way that you look, or your gender, your background. But if I just kind of I love sticking to the facts. So I'll say, for example, that I have like 7 years of domain expertise working in this industry, and this is my particular specialty. And that knowledge is something that no one can replicate, kind of be exactly the same as me. And they can't take that away from me either. And that's something that belongs to you. So if someone was to target you based on a conversation and say, oh, you probably get hired. For me, it was, oh, you should go to these minority VCs, because they'll be the ones that'll fund you. Just kind of push back politely, I guess, and say that, no, I think my expertise is valid, and this is what I have to offer, and go back to your value and your worth.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, my response to that, Farah, would be that, you know, if you're in that room, you belong in that room. And so as long as you own that and you feel comfortable about it, you know, just kick ass. That's what you're there for. So gentlemen at the back, and please, again, online, if anyone wants to ask any questions, please just dive in.
Hi, thanks a lot. I wanted to ask, one of the responses to diversity, either in gender or in race, is to try to encourage people of that similar diverse background to do something. Say, for instance, you create funds for diverse founders, for minority groups, or for to back female founders, as a way to respond to a lack of diversity. How much might that have an impact in shaping narrative or understanding of the value of the founders themselves? And then, is this something that could be mandated with policy, some kind of affirmative action to say we need some certain amount of money going to investors for female founders? And what kind of impact might this have? Thank you.
So I might just start on a response to that, if I may, and then obviously ask your collective perspective. I think, you know, obviously there's some sensitivities on the affirmative action versus positive action. In the US, that would be legal in some contexts. In the UK, it wouldn't. But I think the point is that actually this is about where LPs can really make a difference. And LPs are the ones that actually give the investors the money. And if the LPs are saying your portfolio is not diverse enough, they have to listen. So I do believe fundamentally there's a huge power in the voice of LPs that hasn't yet really come to the fore. And I hope we'll see more activism. And I think, you know, you're right, that's relevant in terms of gender, relevant in terms of founders of color. It's also relevant on issues that matter, like sustainability, for example. You know, a lot of LPs are now thinking about the sustainability in their investment portfolio, which is going to really potentially change the dial on how much money goes into all of those areas. But Tahmima, Priyanka, any perspectives?
Please, Priyanka.
Oh, well, in my opinion, I think that they really play a key part in helping all of the different areas of specialties, just like Priya mentioned, like whether it's like sustainability or whether it's focusing more on gender bias and having kind of elevating the number of companies that they have in their portfolio, and kind of bringing more awareness to the fact that they shouldn't have just one type of business in their portfolio. I think it's important to have the opportunity for more companies to be to kind of take part in their in kind of their perspective of who should play a key role in having a place in their portfolio.
Now, I think there was a gentleman here with a question. Thank you so much, Joy.
Thanks. Hi. My question is something like, to what extent do you feel like sort of toxic male behavior comes from a minority but is tolerated too much? And to what extent do you feel like it's like frankly comes from most men?
Okay. Tahmima, why don't you take a first stab at that?
I was having this conversation with someone the other day where we were like, we should normalize a way for men to signal to each other that they're making inappropriate. Like, because sometimes he's like, you're just hanging out, you're having a few drinks. You don't want to be the guy to be like, that's really inappropriate. But to find a really cool way. And we were like, maybe you could be like, bro, no, or something like that. And it would become code for, you just said something really shitty and we're calling you on it. And I think it's exactly the sort of herd mentality. And if it wasn't completely normal for people to call each other out when they're in groups with each other, in the way that I think it would be, 20 years ago when I was in high school, it was okay to make a really homophobic joke. And I don't think that's okay anymore for teenagers to make homophobic jokes with each other. They will call each other out and they will say that is not okay. And if we can bring some of that unacceptability into male behavior and language, then I think we can, really change things. So.
Yeah, I was going to maybe evolve that question slightly, if I may, because one of the things that you've said to me before, Priyanka, is that actually one of the most powerful positive experiences on your journey has been actually male allies, so male supporters. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my main investor is a male. And so I think it's really important to not just look at male and female, but like I mentioned, look at champions for your business. Some of my greatest mentors have been male. So I think it's about finding those people, those allies that'll really help support your business and that understand you as a founder, and that want to be a part of your team to help move you forward.
Yeah, I think we talked, didn't we, in the same vein that you were saying earlier about sort of women lifting each other up. Actually, this is a real opportunity. This isn't a male versus female thing. And thankfully, I think the behavior you identify there is a minority, but both the sort of, no bro, no, which is now the hashtag of the day. But also, just that opportunity for sort of allyship and support is an incredibly powerful dynamic. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So I did want you to sort of maybe finish up on that slightly more sort of positive note about the experience of being a female founder, and come back to something that you and I talked about, Tahmima, which is just, what was behind the book and sort of what's the positivity that comes out through the book. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's the story of a woman who tries to make it in the tech world and all the obstacles that she faces. But really, I wanted to treat that with a lot of lightness and joy and humor and have her really look at that world and just have a laugh. And that it brought me incredible joy to be able to satirize that world, which is why I called it a feminist rom-com, because it has that rom-com aspect of it, but it also obviously has this powerful feminist message. So yeah, I think being able to look at our situation and laugh about it, I think is something that can give us a lot of strength and, empowerment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Priyanka, you've talked about that sort of the power of allyship and support that you've got along the way, but what else has been an incredibly positive experience for you as a female founder?
I think the friendships I formed along the way with other female founders and the communities that I've been a part of that help build each other up has been very rewarding. And by myself being a female founder, I feel like I've also been able to support other women that are interested in doing the same thing. So I've had people reach out for mentorship or just to ask questions. And I feel like as soon as I was able to ask others for help, I'm now able to also give that help to the next set of people that want to become a founder themselves. So that's been an incredible experience for me as a founder.
That's wonderful. So I'm very sadly going to have to draw this to a close because it's such a pleasure to be back in a room talking to people about such an important topic and to have you all listening in from the online platform. So thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, Tahmima, for sharing your experiences. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you,
Thank
Priyanka.
you so much.
Thank you all so much. This was really fun.